You?
Okay. All right, we're in 2 Chronicles, chapter number 23. And we've seen how that in Judah we've had, over the past couple of chapters, we've had about 3 bad kings, but it only lasted for about 15 years between all 3 of them. And now we're going to see something a little different, beginning it here tonight in tonight's lesson. So, the next king is going to reign for about 40 years or so. Yeah, 40 years. But we'll get started here, chapter 23, verse 1. And in the 7th year, Jehoiada strengthened himself and took the captains of hundreds, Azariah the son of Jeroham, and Ishmael the son of Jehonan, and Azariah the son of Obed, and Maaseiah the son of Adiah, and Elishaphat the son of Zichri, into covenant with him. So, and now Jehoiada is a priest. And now they've gone through all these years with wicked kings. And now they have a wicked queen, Athaliah, I think is how you pronounce her name. But you know, she's bloody. She killed her own children, all but one. They took one and hid in the temple for 6 years. So, but her reign is about to come to an end here. And that's why Jehoiada, the priest, he's tired of all of the wickedness. And so he gets the captains of parcels or portions of the army to align with him. And but you know, he knows, and the reason he's doing that because he knows the next king is only going to be about 7 years old. So it's, you know, he's going to have to, somebody's going to have to act in his place for a few years. So Jehoiada got these men to align with him and make covenant with him. And it says, and they went about in Judah and gathered the Levites out of all the cities of Judah and the chiefs of the fathers of Israel, and they came to Jerusalem. And now, you know, he's bringing all these people together, the Levites, which were the priestly line, and he's getting them in line to help protect when they anoint a new king. So, and all the congregation made a covenant with the king in the house of God, and he said unto them, Behold, the king's son shall reign, as the Lord hath said of the sons of David. So, you know, everybody's thinking that, you know, there's no other son in the lineage of David to go with, but there is, because they had hidden this one son. And, you know, God is going to make sure that what he says comes to pass. God was not going to fail at that. He had promised David that there would always be somebody in his lineage on the throne. And now, you know, there are not kings there today, but Christ will be on the throne forever. So, and God spoke to David about that. So, but, you know, we have a son that will become king. This is the thing that you shall do. A third part of you entering on the Sabbath of the priest and of the Levite shall be porters of the doors, or keepers at the door. And a third part shall be at the king's house, and a third part at the gate of the foundation, and all the people shall be in the courts of the house of the Lord. So, Jehoiada is trying to make sure that everything about this new king is protected. He's going to have people at the doors of the temple, at the throne of the king, at the king's house. He's going to have them all around. At the gates, entering into the courtyard at the temple. He's going to have men placed at all these places. And it is to help protect the small child that's going to be king. But he says, "But let none come into the house of the Lord, save the priests, and they that minister of the Levites, they shall go in, for they are holy. But all the people shall keep the watch of the Lord." So, we've got to be on guard, in other words. And you've got to make sure you know who it is. The only ones that's going to enter in to the temple will be priests, because they're holy. They've been set aside for this position. That's why God told his people that he would take the tribe of Levi to be the priests, so that they would know. And now, they all, if you look at Jewish people, can anybody tell if they're from which tribe they're from? I don't know how they could tell either, but, they knew who the tribe of the Levites were. So, they've got to make sure that they keep watch and not let anybody in that shouldn't be in the temple. So, and he says, "And the Levites shall compass the king round about, every man with his weapons in his hand, and whosoever else cometh into the house, he shall be put to death. But be you with the king when he cometh in, and when he goeth out." So they're going to surround this king. And if anybody comes in that shouldn't be in there, they're going to kill him. Now, they've taken some weapons from the temple that David placed in there, spears and shields and armor, for these that were to protect the king. So that, and the ones that would stand guard at his house, at the gate, and in the temple. So, they've all been provided what they need to take care of this king. But this one group is going to be around the king, and they're going to be inside of his house with him at all times, inside the temple with him at all times. So the Levites and all Judah did according to all things that Jehoiada the priest had commanded, and took every man his men that were to come in on the Sabbath, with them that were to go out on the Sabbath. For Jehoiada the priest dismissed not the courses. So, they had to know who was with them. Whoever was the captain over whatever group, they would know who was with them, and they would come in and out together. And Jehoiada was not going to be the one to dismiss them, or it was going to be the captain over that group would take care of those things. So they have, they have control of who enters in and who does. Because even Jehoiada, him being kind of like the high priest, he couldn't be there all the time. So, it gave authority to different ones that could dismiss as others came in. So, moreover, Jehoiada the priest delivered to the captains of hundreds spears and bucklers and shields that had been King David's, which were in the house of God. So here, they've taken all these these pieces of armor and spears and their shields from the house of God for these men, that they would have for protection if somebody came in and tried to kill the king. So, and which was a good thing. And he said, all the people, every man having his weapon in his hand, from the right side of the temple to the left side of the temple, along by the altar, and the temple by the king round about. So, he set everybody in their proper order. He put everybody where they needed to be stationed at, so as, they're about to have, I guess you could say, a coronation service where they're going to crown somebody as king, and he wants to make sure that nobody can get to the king. So he's going to place them out in strategic spots to protect the king, because he's just a young boy. And it says, then they brought out the king's son, and put upon him the crown, and gave him the testimony, and made him king. And Jehoiada and his sons anointed him, and said, God save the king. So long live the king. And now he's king. That's all it took. Now, wasn't that short of a service that all they had to do was say, well, God save the king. But, it was more to the ceremony, but that's pretty much what was taking place. They brought the child out. They anointed him with oil and no doubt prayed over him and had a ceremony for that, put the crown on him, and then, it's God save the king or long live the king. So they now have a new king, although the queen, Athaliah, that's her name, Athaliah, she is not going to like it, but she has no choice. Now when Athaliah heard the noise of people running and praising the king, she came to the people into the house of the Lord. So, when they had him anointed as king and had completed that service, they were singing and praising God now that they had somebody to be king, that with Jehoiada, because Jehoiada, he is, and I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but he's going to try to clean up the place. He's going to try to clean up Judah to where it should be and point them into serving God rather than following a wicked king or queen. So now when Athaliah heard these things going on, she ran to the temple. She knew something had happened. She wanted to know what it was. And she looked, and behold, the king stood at his pillar at the entering in, and the princes and the trumpets by the king, and all the people of the land rejoiced and sounded with trumpets, also singers with instruments of music, and such as taught to sing praise. Then Athaliah rent her clothes and said, treason, treason. She was hoping that by hollering treason, that this was a treasonous act, that she could get somebody in this crowd that would follow her. But she's not going to succeed at that, although she is going to get somebody to follow her, but it's not going to be for what she wants. So, but, she's seeing what's going on, all the dancing and the music and the singing and the praising God that, they have a king. Not a queen, a king. So, when they asked for a king, when Israel asked for a king, and God tried to tell them that, they didn't know what they were asking for, that they didn't need a king. They had the only king. as their king. But when they kept on, God finally told Samuel, just give them what they want. But in all that God laid out, I never found any provisions for making a lady head over any of Judah or Israel. And I mean, I'm not putting down women, that's not what I'm saying. But God didn't make provision for that. It's just like in a marriage. God devised a marriage of a man and a woman, and that's it. And the man is supposed to be the head of the household, and then the lady under the man. They have different responsibilities in that household, but God loves them both. But God gave them different responsibilities. So, but she began to holler out, treason, treason. You know, she rent her clothes. She tore her queen's garments in an act of anger and sorrow that, you know, y'all have anointed a man or a little boy king. So, then Jehoiada, the priest, brought out the captains of hundreds that were set over the host, and said unto them, have her forth of the ranges, and whoso followeth her, let him be slain with the sword. For the priest said, slay her, not in the house of the Lord. So they laid hands on her, and when she was come to the entering in of the horse gate by the king's house, they slew her there. So she came in wanting attention and wanting somebody to follow her. They followed her, but for a different reason. And now Jehoiada told them that if anybody follows her for the reason of battle, you kill them too. We're not going to put up with that. You know, they didn't put up with a lot of stuff. And nor did God. You know, I know sometimes it may seem that God was harsh, but God wasn't. It's just like, you know, I still see these signs around town, and I'm seeing them more and more over in this section of town about Miss Smith's faith call, and she'll tell you all your problems and stuff. And I want to get out and snatch every one of them up and burn them. But see, back in the Old Testament days, God told them, if you find somebody practicing this kind of stuff, he said, you take them outside the city and stone them to death. Now, that seems harsh. But why would God want that? The reason is, God knew that if that person stayed, eventually they're going to get somebody to listen to them. And then it'll start with one, then directly it might be 10, then it might be 20, and then it's going to spread like wildfire. So God said, you know, we'll just cut that off right to start with. End it. So now with Athaliah, after she screams treason, treason, Jehoiada said, hey, y'all follow her. If anybody else follows her, you kill them and you take care of her. And they get to the horse gate over by the king's house, and they kill her. And that's the end of Athaliah. So, and you see with all the, and you know, I don't want to say it sound like I'm just for men, but you see that with all the male kings, even the evil kings, it shared about them being buried. It shared about them being put in the sepulcher that was prepared for them and all this kind of stuff. But we don't find that here for her. So, you know, to me, that and with the, you know, what I've already shared, it lets me know that God really didn't want her in control. So, all right, we'll move on. Verse 16, and Jehoiada made a covenant between him and between all the people, and between the king, that they should be the Lord's people. So, that's what he's wanting, and that he's tired of all of the killing, and, this mother that killed all of her children, and she would have killed this little baby. She was queen for 6 years. And so, he was only a year old when she instituted herself as queen. And this kid's a year old, she's killing all of her children. So she would have killed him too had they not hid him in the temple. And they kept him hid for 6 years. So now he's 7 years old. And Jehoiada is making a covenant between him and between all the people. And between the king. And he's only 7 years old. Hey, let's go the ways of God. And, I'm thankful. And, the next king is going to be Joash, which is the 7-year-old kid. And he is considered one of the good kings. That was a part of Judah's history. So, then all the people went to the house of Baal and break it down and break his altars and his images in pieces and slew Mattan, the priest of Baal, before the altars. So, they were serving false gods because of Athaliah and because of these other two knotheads that went the way of Ahab and Jezebel. So they were serving anything. It really didn't matter. If they thought it would help them, hey, we'll serve anything. But there's only one God. And so now they've made a covenant that they're going to serve God. And they have all agreed. And they go and they just tear up the house of Baal. They tear it down. I don't want to incite a riot or nothing, but, there's some types of places that call themselves worship places that need to be tore down in our country. But because they're not worshiping God. They're not following what this says. They're following another book, and it's not anything to do with the Bible. It tells them to kill people and this kind of, it's crazy. But, they're taking care of business. They're going through and they're tearing up the house of Baal. They take the prophet or the priest of Baal and they slay him. They don't want any of it left. They don't want anything left that would hinder people from serving God. So, but does that take care of Baal? No, there's other people up in Israel that serving Baal, and it's sad that a lot of times people get so caught up in things in this world that they follow the ways of the world rather than the things of God. So, but they're trying to get started back on the right foot. And now they've got a 7-year-old as king, and they can kind of teach him, the ways to go in God. At that age, they could share, hey, you know what? God's the only way to go. That's the time to teach a child when they're young. Now, it's not to say that you can't teach people as they get older, because you can. But if you start them when they're young, it's much easier to keep them, going. And if they do stray, according to Scripture, the Bible says when they get older, they'll come back to that they've been taught. So, Also Jehoiada appointed the offices of the house of the Lord by the hand of the priests, the Levites, whom David had distributed in the house of the Lord to offer the burnt offerings of the Lord, as it is written in the law of Moses, with rejoicing and with singing, as it was ordained by David. So, Jehoiada, he wanted to follow what God's word said. He wanted to follow the ways that David had set in order, because before he died, he began to tell Solomon how many people to be singers and how many people to be music players and instrument players, whatever, and just all these things. And, if you remember when we were reading those things, they had a choir director. They had somebody that was kind of head over the singing. So, and David tried to get all that set in order before he died. And Jehoiada is wanting to follow in the manner that David had done. Even with the offices in the temple. And how to do the burnt offerings and all these things. Who to set over that. Because that's why it would take the whole tribe of Levi. This was not an easy task. With the burnt offerings and the peace offerings and just all kinds of offerings that had to be given. It took a huge number of people, because this had to be done 24/7. There was fires and different parts of the lamps that could not go out. God told them to make sure that they stayed lit. So they had a responsibility. All of the Levites, not all of them could be the high priest. So one was chosen for the high priest, and then that was passed down through the lane of time with what God would lead them to do until they got to appointing their own. So it was like a lot of things, people get away from the ways of God, and that's sad. So he appointed all these offices and how to do these things with rejoicing, with singing, as it was ordained by David. And he set the porters at the gates of the house of the Lord, that none which was unclean in anything should enter in. If somebody was unclean, they had to see the high priest before they could ever enter back in. He would tell them what they needed to do to become clean again. If somebody touched a dead body in these days, they had, I think it was maybe till nightfall, or it might have been nightfall the next day. They had a certain period of time that they had to stay outside of the city because they had touched a dead body, to be clean again, to be able to enter into the temple. And that's what God laid out for them. There was a lot of other things that went on that, just like being a leper, which was a disease. Now, a person that the leprosy was white, they could go in and out, but they had to make sure with the high priest that everything was good to go, and then if he said, okay, you can go, they were able to go. But if the leprosy wasn't white, it was still contagious. So they had to stay outside the city. But now, like with Naaman, who was a leper, when the prophet told him to go dip down 7 times in the river, when he came up that 7 times, he was free and clear of leprosy. His didn't turn white. He was free and clear. So, but they had these porters at the gates. They had a responsibility. They couldn't just let anybody and everybody into the temple. And no bigger than the temple was, which, it wasn't a small building, but it wasn't a huge building either. you couldn't have but so many in there at a time. So you had to have porters at the gates to kind of direct the traffic in and out. So no doubt there was some in the courtyard that would keep people kind of gathered here. When this group comes out, you can go in, so. And he took the captains of hundreds, and the nobles, and the governors of the people, and all the people of the land, and brought down the king from the house of the Lord, and they came through the high gate into the king's house, and set the king upon the throne of the kingdom. Now this is a 7-year-old child, Joash, and you'll look down in verse 1 of chapter 4. Joash was 7 years old when he began to reign. So, but at 7 years old, I mean, he's got to have help. So Jehoiada was his helper to help him through until he was old enough to carry on the business of the kingdom. So. And all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quiet after that they had slain Athaliah with the sword. No doubt it was quiet because, I mean, she was wicked. That was a wicked woman. I mean, she was a killer. She had blood in her eyes. She didn't mind killing you. I mean, somebody would kill their own children just because they want power. I mean, that is terrible. She'll kill anybody. So, no doubt they were glad to see this lady go that shouldn't have been in there to start with. But she kind of seized power, and she was wicked, and people were afraid of her. Until Jehoiada just kind of, really, he said, enough's enough. If you'll follow me, we're going to take care of this junk. But see, no doubt he was trusting God because it was going to bring back into the kingship a son through the lineage of David. Anybody have anything on any of these verses? Now, if you look at that chart, whatever listing of all the kings, king number 8, Joash, on the Judah side is where we're at. He's going to reign for 40 years. And, we're going to have 3 good kings here in a row. But a lot of years here with, doing their best to serve God. These people were no different really than we are today. They were not perfect. That's why they continually had to bring different offerings and things, but in these days, the high priest had to go in the Holy of Holies to ask God for forgiveness for them. Aren't you glad we can go ourselves? Say, God, please forgive me. We don't have to tell anybody what we've done. All we've got to do is tell God, you know what? I'm sorry, forgive me, and He'll do that. That's the God we serve. So, anybody have anything? Okay, next week we'll get more into